Alien commander witnesses human warfare, resigns immediately, and heads to Earth. Commander Zexai stood in front of the massive viewing screen on the bridge of his ship. The stars looked the same as always, but today felt different. Today, he had received new orders from the Galactic Confederation. The blue-skinned alien adjusted his uniform and read the message one more time. "Study the humans," the order said. "Report on their military strength. Prepare them for joining our peaceful galaxy." Zexai had done this job many times before. His species, the Maryland, were natural observers. They lived underwater on their home planet and had learned to watch and wait before acting. The Confederation trusted them to study new species because they were careful and smart. The human planet called Earth was far from the center of the galaxy. The Confederation had been listening to their radio signals for 50 years. Most of what they heard was music, news, and entertainment shows. Sometimes they picked up military communications, but nothing seemed special about human warfare. "They fight with simple weapons," the report said. "They use metal bullets and explosive devices. Their technology is basic. They spend most of their time fighting each other instead of exploring space." Zexai had read similar reports about dozens of species. Young civilizations always fought among themselves before learning to live in peace. It was natural. The galaxy was full of species that had made this same journey from war to peace. His ship, the Deep Current, was one of the most advanced vessels in the Confederation fleet. It could hide completely from any sensors that humans possessed. The crew of 200 Maryland soldiers and scientists would observe Earth from a safe distance, gather information, and return home with a complete report. "Commander," said his second-in-command, Officer called in, "we are approaching the human solar system. Should we begin observations?" Zexai nodded. "Take us to the edge of their detection range. Start recording everything. I want to know how they fight, how they think, and how dangerous they might be." The ship moved silently through space. Human technology could not detect them. The Confederation had been watching Earth for decades without humans knowing. Soon they would make contact and invite humanity to join the peaceful galactic community. But first they needed to understand human military capabilities. The Confederation had learned long ago that it was better to know a species' weapons before meeting them face to face. The Deep Current settled into position near the orbit of the planet humans called Pluto. From here, they could see everything happening on Earth and around it. The ship's sensors could detect the smallest details from billions of miles away. "What do you see?" Zexai asked his science officer. "The humans have several conflicts happening right now," the officer replied. "There is fighting in 3 different regions of their planet. They also have military exercises happening in international waters." Zexai smiled. This would be easy. Military exercises were perfect for understanding how a species fought. He could watch their tactics, count their weapons, and measure their technology. Then he could write his report and recommend the best way to approach humanity. "Focus our sensors on the largest military exercise," he ordered. "Record everything. I want detailed analysis of their weapons, their strategies, and their leadership methods." The viewing screen showed images of human ships moving across Earth's oceans. The ships looked crude compared to Confederation technology. They were made of metal and powered by chemical reactions. Some of them carried aircraft that could barely leave the planet's atmosphere. Very primitive, Zexai thought to himself. These humans are probably centuries away from real space warfare. The Confederation had specific ways of measuring military threats. They looked at technology levels, tactical sophistication, and strategic thinking. Most species scored low in all 3 areas when they were first discovered. Humans would probably be the same. His communications officer interrupted his thoughts. "Commander, we are receiving new intelligence data from our long-range listening posts. The humans are conducting what they call war games in multiple locations simultaneously." War games. Zexai knew about these. Many species practiced combat scenarios to train their soldiers. It was a good way to see how they would fight in a real war without anyone getting hurt. The Confederation encouraged this kind of training because it usually led to more peaceful societies. "Show me their largest war game," Zexai said. "I want to see their best soldiers and their most advanced tactics." The screen changed to show a vast desert where thousands of human soldiers were participating in a training exercise. They had tanks, aircraft, and various types of weapons. Everything looked exactly like what the Confederation expected from a young military civilization. "Begin detailed scans," Zexai ordered. measure the power of their weapons,
Count their vehicles.
analyze their communication systems. This should take about a week to complete. His crew began their work with practiced efficiency. They had done this many times before. The process was always the same. Watch, measure, categorize, and report. Young species were predictable. They had the same types of weapons, the same basic strategies, and the same simple tactics. HFY started writing his preliminary report in his mind. Species, human. Classification, Tier 3 emerging civilization. Military threat level, minimal. Recommended integration timeline, standard peaceful contact protocol. The peaceful contact protocol was the Confederation's normal way of meeting new species. They would send ambassadors, share some basic technology, and invite the new species to join the galactic community. It usually worked well because most species were eager to learn about the larger universe. "Commander," his tactical officer called out, "the humans are beginning their exercise. Should we record their standard battle procedures?" "Yes," HFY replied. "Document everything. I want a complete analysis of their capabilities." He settled into his command chair and prepared to watch a routine military exercise. In a few hours he would understand exactly how humans fought. Then he could finish his report and recommend that the Confederation begin peaceful contact procedures. The exercise began with human forces moving across the desert in organized formations. Their tanks rolled forward in straight lines while aircraft flew overhead in predictable patterns. Everything looked normal and expected. HFY felt confident in his assessment. Humans were following the same basic military principles that every other species used. They had ground forces, air support, and simple communication systems. There were no surprises here. This will be an easy report to write, he thought. Another peaceful species ready to join the galaxy. But something in the back of his mind felt different. The way the humans moved seemed almost too organized. Their formations were perfect, but also, somehow, creative. There was something about their approach that he had never seen before. He shook his head and dismissed the feeling. Every species had small differences in how they fought. Humans were probably just more artistic in their movements. Some species were like that. It did not make them dangerous. The real test would come when the opposing forces met in battle. That was when he would see their true capabilities and understand their real threat level. HFY watched the screen and waited for the combat to begin. Soon he would have all the information he needed to complete his mission and return home. The humans would join the Confederation as peaceful members, just like every other species before them. At least, that was what he expected to happen. Alien commander witnesses human warfare, resigns immediately and heads to Earth. The first sign that something was wrong came during the third day of observation. HFY was reviewing the recorded data from the human military exercise when his science officer made an unusual report. "Commander, the humans are not following standard tactical procedures," the officer said, confusion clear in his voice. "They appear to be making up new strategies during the battle." HFY looked up from his data pad. "What do you mean, making up strategies?" "All species use established military tactics." "Show me." The viewing screen displayed footage from the human war games. Two armies faced each other across a desert landscape. But instead of charging forward in organized lines like every other species did, the humans were doing something completely different. One group of human soldiers had somehow turned their supply trucks into weapons. They loaded the trucks with explosives and drove them toward enemy positions while the drivers jumped out at the last second. The trucks exploded and created huge holes in the enemy's defenses. "That is not standard procedure," HFY said, staring at the screen. "They are using transport vehicles as weapons. This is highly irregular, but it worked." The human soldiers rushed through the gaps created by the exploding trucks and overwhelmed their opponents. They had turned a simple supply vehicle into an effective weapon in a matter of hours. "Show me more," HFY ordered. The tactical officer brought up another section of the battle. Here, a group of human soldiers was surrounded by enemy forces with no way to escape. According to every military manual in the Confederation, they should have surrendered or fought until they were defeated. Instead, the humans did something impossible. They built weapons out of broken vehicle parts and rocks from the desert. They created explosive devices using materials from their own equipment. They even turned their clothing into camouflage that made them almost invisible against the desert sand. But the most shocking thing was how they coordinated their attack. Without any communication equipment, The surrounded humans somehow worked together to confuse their enemies. They made noise in one location while attacking from another. They created fake positions that drew enemy fire away from their real positions. How are they communicating? HFY asked. Our sensors show no radio transmissions between those units. We believe they are using hand signals and prearranged codes, the science officer replied. But Commander, they appear to be making up new signals as the battle progresses. They are adapting their communication system in real time. HFY felt something cold in his stomach. No species adapted that quickly. Military tactics took years to develop and test. Communication systems required months of training. These humans were changing everything about how they fought while they were fighting. Continue monitoring, he said. I need to understand what we are seeing. The battle continued for 2 more days. During that time, HFY watched the humans do things that should have been impossible. They turned cooking equipment into weapons. They used musical instruments to send coded messages across long distances. They even trained local animals to carry supplies through enemy territory. One group of human soldiers created an entire fake army using inflatable decoys and recorded sounds. They convinced their opponents that a massive force was approaching from the west, while the real attack came from the east. The deception was so complete that enemy commanders redirected half their forces to defend against an army that did not exist. This is not normal military behavior, HFY said to his senior staff during their daily briefing. These humans are treating warfare like some kind of creative exercise. Perhaps they are simply more intelligent than we initially assessed, suggested the science officer. No, HFY replied. Intelligence alone cannot explain this. Other species in the galaxy are intelligent. The Cathari have higher brain capacity than humans. The Zorn can process information faster than any known species, but none of them fight like this. He paused and looked at the data they had collected. These humans are doing something different. They are not just trying to win battles. They are inventing new ways to fight while they fight. The communications officer spoke up. Commander, we have intercepted some of their internal communications. The human soldiers appear to be enjoying themselves. Enjoying themselves? HFY asked. What do you mean? They are laughing, sir. They make jokes during combat. They seem to find the challenge of fighting to be entertaining rather than stressful. HFY stared at the officer. Show me. The screen displayed footage of human soldiers during a particularly intense part of the battle. They were outnumbered and surrounded, facing certain defeat. But instead of showing fear or desperation, they were smiling. Some of them were actually laughing as they fought. One human soldier jury-rigged an explosive device while under enemy fire. When it worked perfectly and destroyed an enemy position, he raised his arms in celebration and shouted with joy. His companions cheered and congratulated him on his creativity. They are celebrating the act of creating weapons, HFY said slowly. They find joy in the process of inventing new ways to fight. This was completely outside the experience of every species in the Confederation. War was serious business. It was about survival, territory, and resources. No one was supposed to enjoy it. Commander, the tactical officer said, there is something else. The humans are not just adapting their tactics during this exercise. They are teaching each other new techniques as they fight. The screen showed human soldiers sharing their innovations with their teammates in real time. A soldier who had figured out how to turn a radio into a jamming device taught the technique to others during a brief break in combat. Within an hour, dozens of human units were using the same improvised weapon. They are learning and spreading knowledge during active combat, HFY observed. This should be impossible. Soldiers cannot learn complex new skills while under stress. But the humans were doing exactly that. They were treating the entire battle as a massive learning exercise. Every problem they encountered became an opportunity to invent a solution. Every solution became a lesson to share with others. By the end of the week-long exercise, the human soldiers had created over 300 new tactical techniques. They had invented dozens of improvised weapons. They had developed entirely new forms of battlefield communication. Most disturbing of all, they had documented everything. The humans were keeping detailed records of every innovation so they could use them in future conflicts. They are not just fighting, HFY said to himself. They are researching. They are experimenting. They are turning warfare into a science. He looked at the preliminary report he had been writing. Species human. Classification Tier 3 emerging civilization. Military threat level, minimal. Every word was wrong. Delete the report, he told his aide. We need to observe more. I need to understand what we are really dealing with. But deep in his mind, HFY was beginning to suspect that humanity was unlike any species the Confederation had ever encountered. These were not simple warriors fighting for territory or resources. These were beings who had weaponized creativity itself. The exercise ended with both human armies congratulating each other on their innovations. They shared their new techniques and discussed how to improve them for next time. They treated their opponents as colleagues rather than enemies. HFY realized he was watching something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had turned conflict into a form of collaborative art, and they were just getting started. Alien commander witnesses human warfare, resigns immediately and heads to Earth. After the war games ended, HFY ordered his crew to access human historical databases. If he was going to understand these beings, he needed to know how they had developed such unusual approaches to warfare. What he discovered in their records changed everything he thought he knew about intelligent life. Commander, his research specialist announced, we have successfully decoded human historical archives dating back several thousand years. The data is extensive. HFY settled into his chair, expecting to find the usual pattern of primitive conflicts over resources and territory. Instead, he found something that made no sense according to everything the Confederation knew about civilized behavior. Humans had been fighting continuously for their entire recorded history. Not occasional conflicts like other species, but constant ongoing warfare that never seemed to end. They fought for land, for resources, for political control, but also for concepts that had no physical form. They wage war over ideas, HFY said, reading the data in disbelief. They fight about how society should be organized. They kill each other over different ways of thinking about gods that they cannot prove exist. His science officer looked up from her own analysis. Commander, it gets stranger. They appear to have multiple conflicts happening simultaneously, sometimes on different continents, for completely different reasons. The records showed that while humans fought wars about religion in one part of their planet, they simultaneously fought wars about economic systems in another part, and while those conflicts raged, they also fought wars about racial differences, territorial boundaries, and political ideologies. No species fights over abstract concepts, HFY muttered. Warfare is about survival and resources. These humans are fighting about philosophy. But as he continued reading, something even more disturbing emerged. Despite thousands of years of constant warfare, humans had also been creating art, music, literature, and scientific discoveries. They had built beautiful cities, composed magnificent symphonies, and developed advanced mathematics while simultaneously perfecting the art of killing each other. Show me their military technological development, HFY ordered. The tactical officer brought up a timeline of human weapons development. What HFY saw defied every model of civilizational progress the Confederation used. Humans had started with simple stone tools and wooden spears. Then they invented bronze weapons, iron swords, and steel armor, but they had not stopped there. They had created gunpowder, firearms, artillery, explosives, aircraft, missiles, and finally nuclear weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They developed planet-killing weapons, HFY said slowly, and then decided not to use them. That is correct. Commander, the tactical officer confirmed. They created nuclear weapons 75 years ago. They used them twice, saw the results, and then signed treaties limiting their use. This was unprecedented. No species in Confederation history had ever developed ultimate weapons and then chosen restraint. The normal pattern was either to destroy themselves or to achieve peace through the threat of mutual annihilation. But humans had done something different. They had kept making nuclear weapons while simultaneously creating international laws to prevent their use. They had turned their most destructive capability into a tool for maintaining peace. They weaponized their own restraint, HFY realized. They made peace itself into a military strategy. The more he read, the more confused he became. Human military history was filled with examples of behavior that violated every principle of logical warfare. Soldiers who fought to the death for no strategic advantage. Armies that continued fighting when victory was impossible. Warriors who chose certain death rather than surrender. But most disturbing were the accounts of human soldiers who had been surrounded. outnumbered and facing certain defeat, yet had continued fighting while singing their national songs. They had turned their final moments into acts of defiance that inspired others to continue the fight. They treat dying in battle as a form of artistic expression, HFY said to his senior staff. They create meaning from meaningless deaths. Commander, his cultural analyst added, we have found something else. Humans write poetry about warfare. They compose music about battles. They create paintings depicting combat. They have turned warfare into an aesthetic experience. HFY requested examples. What he saw shattered his understanding of intelligent behavior. Human poets had written beautiful verses about the horror of war, while simultaneously celebrating the courage of warriors. Human musicians had composed symphonies that captured both the tragedy and the glory of battle. Human artists had painted scenes of combat that were both terrible and magnificent. They have made war into art, he said quietly. They find beauty in destruction. But the most shocking discovery came when his team analyzed human special forces operations. These elite soldiers performed missions that should have been impossible for any biological being to survive. The records showed humans infiltrating enemy positions by disguising themselves as local civilians, sometimes for months at a time. They learned new languages, adopted foreign customs, and created entirely new identities to gather intelligence or sabotage enemy operations. They are method actors, the cultural analyst explained. They become their disguises so completely that even they believe in their false identities. Other special forces operations showed humans enduring extreme physical hardship to complete missions that had minimal strategic value. They would crawl through hostile territory for days without food or water, just to deliver a message or rescue a single person. They risk everything for symbolic victories, HFY observed. They will die for gestures that have no practical military value. The ultimate example came from a mission where human special forces had infiltrated an enemy stronghold not to destroy it, but to leave a message spray-painted on the wall. The message read, "We were here. You are not safe." Psychological warfare, the tactical officer explained. They attacked the enemy's confidence rather than their physical assets. HFY stared at the report. They weaponized graffiti. As he continued reading, he realized that humans had weaponized everything. They had turned music into military communication systems. They had converted dance into battlefield coordination techniques. They had even weaponized their own emotions using anger, fear, and love as tactical advantages. But the final revelation came when he read about human prisoners of war. Instead of simply enduring captivity like every other species, humans had turned imprisonment itself into a form of resistance. They created secret communication networks using tap codes on prison walls. They organized resistance activities while under constant surveillance. They maintained military discipline and command structures even when completely powerless. Some human prisoners had spent years in captivity while secretly gathering intelligence about their captors. Others had used their time in prison to recruit their guards to their cause. A few had even convinced enemy soldiers to defect by simply talking to them about human philosophy. They turned defeat into victory, HFY said, his voice barely above a whisper. They weaponized their own suffering. The most disturbing account involved a group of human prisoners who had been tortured for information. Instead of breaking under the pressure, they had given their captors false information that was so carefully crafted it led enemy forces into a devastating trap. They turned torture into a counterintelligence operation, the research specialist reported. They used their own pain as a weapon against their enemies. HFY closed the historical files and sat in silence for several minutes. His crew waited for orders, but he had none to give. Everything he had learned about humans contradicted everything the Confederation knew about intelligent life. These were not merely another species with advanced weapons. They were beings who had transformed warfare itself into something unrecognizable. They had taken the most destructive impulse in the universe and turned it into a form of creative expression. They did not just fight wars. They performed them. They did not just win battles. They composed them. They had made combat into a collaborative art form where both victory and defeat could be beautiful. "Sir?" his aide asked quietly. "Should we continue our observations?" HFY looked at the viewing screen showing peaceful Earth spinning slowly in space. Somewhere on that planet were billions of beings who had spent millennia turning conflict into art. suffering into strength, and defeat into victory. Yes, he said finally, but we need to see them in real combat. These historical records might be exaggerated. I need to observe actual human warfare to understand what we are really dealing with. He had no idea that his next observation would force him to make the most difficult decision of his life. Alien commander witnesses human warfare, resigns immediately and heads to Earth. The opportunity to observe real human combat came sooner than HFY expected. A crisis erupted in one of Earth's conflict zones, and human military forces were deployed to evacuate civilians from a dangerous area. What should have been a routine rescue operation became something that would haunt HFY for the rest of his life. "Commander," his communications officer announced, "we are detecting emergency transmissions from human military units. They appear to be conducting an evacuation operation under hostile conditions." HFY ordered maximum sensor focus on the developing situation. On the screen, he could see human aircraft approaching a city where civilians were trapped by fighting between local military forces. The evacuation should have been simple: land, load the civilians, and leave. But the local forces had different plans. They began firing on the human aircraft as they approached the landing zones. "The humans are taking fire," the tactical officer reported. "Their mission parameters have changed from rescue to combat." HFY watched as the human forces adapted to the new situation. Instead of withdrawing like any sensible military force would do, they continued with their evacuation while simultaneously fighting off attacks. "They are not retreating," he observed. "They are maintaining their rescue mission while under active combat." What happened next demonstrated everything that made humans unique in the galaxy. The human soldiers did not just fight off the attackers. They turned the evacuation itself into a tactical operation that was both militarily brilliant and completely insane. They used civilian aircraft as decoys, while military transports landed in unexpected locations. They coordinated with local civilians to create false landing zones that drew enemy fire away from real evacuation sites. But most incredibly, they convinced some of the attacking forces to help with the evacuation. "How did they do that?" HFY asked, watching enemy soldiers suddenly switch sides and begin protecting civilians. "We intercepted their communications," the signals officer explained. The human commander spoke directly to the opposing forces. He explained that the civilians were not part of the conflict and asked for a temporary ceasefire to allow the evacuation to continue. And the enemy forces agreed? Not only did they agree, sir, some of them began helping to load civilians onto the aircraft. HFY stared at the screen in disbelief. In the middle of active combat, humans had negotiated a temporary alliance with their enemies based purely on shared concern for civilian safety. This was not military tactics. This was something else entirely. The evacuation continued for 6 hours. During that time, human forces fought 3 separate battles while simultaneously rescuing over 2,000 civilians. They treated wounded enemy soldiers alongside their own troops. They shared food and medical supplies with local forces who had been shooting at them hours earlier. But the moment that broke HFY's understanding of reality came when a human transport aircraft was shot down while taking off with a full load of evacuees. The aircraft crashed in enemy territory with no possibility of rescue. According to every military manual in the galaxy, the crew and passengers were lost. The logical action would be to continue the evacuation with the remaining aircraft and write off the casualties as acceptable losses. Instead, the humans did something impossible. A team of 12 human soldiers volunteered for a rescue mission that had no chance of success. They would parachute into enemy territory, reach the crash site, and attempt to extract survivors while surrounded by hostile forces. "This is suicide," HFY said, watching the mission unfold. "They cannot possibly succeed." But the 12 soldiers jumped anyway. They landed in the middle of enemy territory with minimal equipment and no support. The crashed aircraft was 5 kilometers away through heavily defended positions. Any rational military force would have given up. Immediately, the humans began fighting their way toward the crash site. What HFY witnessed during the next 4 hours changed his understanding of what intelligent beings were capable of achieving. The 12 soldiers moved through enemy territory like ghosts, using terrain, weather, and pure audacity to avoid detection. When they could not avoid combat, They fought with such creativity and determination that they seemed almost supernatural. They used enemy weapons against their original owners. They turned destroyed vehicles into fortified positions. They even convinced some enemy soldiers to switch sides by appealing to their basic humanity. But most remarkably, they maintained communication with the survivors at the crash site and convinced them to hold on just a little longer. "We are coming for you," the team leader radioed to the crash survivors. "Do not give up. We never leave anyone behind." When the rescue team finally reached the crash site, they found 37 survivors, including several enemy soldiers who had been helping to treat the wounded. The human soldiers immediately began organizing a defense perimeter while preparing the survivors for extraction. They found more people alive than should have been possible, the medical officer reported. The survivors include crew members, evacuees, and even enemy combatants who were providing medical assistance. The extraction itself defied every principle of military logistics. The rescue team had to move 37 injured people across 5 kilometers of enemy territory with no heavy equipment and limited ammunition. They did it by turning the entire operation into a rolling diplomatic mission as they moved through enemy positions. The human team leader kept broadcasting on open channels, explaining their humanitarian mission and asking for safe passage. He offered to treat wounded enemy soldiers and share medical supplies with anyone who needed them. Incredibly, it worked. Enemy forces not only allowed the rescue column to pass, but many of them began providing assistance. They shared food and water with the evacuees. They helped carry wounded survivors. Some of them even provided armed escort through particularly dangerous areas. "They have convinced their enemies to help rescue the people they shot down," HFY said, his voice filled with awe and terror. They turned a combat operation into a humanitarian mission that included both sides. The rescue team and all 37 survivors reached the extraction point safely. As the human aircraft lifted off, enemy soldiers on the ground waved goodbye to the people they had been trying to kill just hours earlier. HFY sat in his command chair, staring at the reports his crew had compiled. The humans had not just succeeded in an impossible rescue mission, they had transformed active combat into cooperative humanitarian action, by force of will and moral conviction alone. "Commander," his aide asked quietly, "how should we classify this operation in our report?" HFY looked at the standard Confederation forms for military analysis. There were categories for tactical success, strategic victory, technological advancement, and leadership effectiveness, but there was no category for what he had just witnessed. How could he explain to the Confederation High Command that humans had weaponized compassion? That they could turn their enemies into allies through pure moral authority? That they treated rescue missions as more important than military objectives? "Sir?" the aide asked again. "The report?" HFY stood up slowly and walked to his private quarters. He sat at his desk and stared at the blank report form on his computer screen. After several minutes, he began typing. Classification: impossible to determine using existing parameters. He stopped and deleted the words. Then he tried again. Military assessment: humans do not follow logical military principles. He deleted that too. Finally, he wrote, Recommendation: the Confederation is not ready for contact with this species. But even that was inadequate. How could he explain that humans had evolved beyond warfare as the galaxy understood it, that they had turned conflict itself into a tool for creating cooperation and understanding? He could not write this report. No one would believe it. The Confederation would assume he had suffered some kind of psychological breakdown. They would send another team to complete the assessment, and those observers would face the same impossible task. HFY deleted the entire document and opened a new file. This one was his letter of resignation from the Galactic Confederation Navy. To the High Command, he wrote, I hereby submit my immediate resignation from all military duties and request civilian transport to Earth. I have discovered something that changes everything we know about intelligent life, and I must understand it before the Confederation makes contact with humanity. He paused, then added, What I have witnessed suggests that humans represent either the greatest threat or the greatest hope the galaxy has ever encountered. I intend to find out which. HFY sealed the letter and sent it through official channels. Then he began making arrangements for the most unprecedented action in Confederation history, an alien commander seeking asylum on Earth. Alien commander witnesses human warfare, resigns immediately and heads to Earth. 3 days after sending his resignation, HFY received a response from Confederation High Command. As expected, they rejected his resignation and ordered him to complete his mission. They also assigned a psychiatric evaluation team to assess his mental fitness for duty. HFY had anticipated this response. He sent a second message, this time invoking an ancient Maryland law that allowed military officers to claim sanctuary status when faced with moral conflicts that threatened their spiritual well-being. It was a law that had not been used in over 1,000 years. While waiting for the bureaucratic process to resolve, HFY continued observing human activities. Each day brought new revelations about the strange nature of human warfare in society. He watched humans conduct military training exercises that looked more like art performances than combat preparation. Soldiers practiced movement sequences that were both tactically effective and aesthetically beautiful. They turned weapon maintenance into a meditative ritual. They even organized competitive events where different units tried to create the most innovative solutions to tactical problems. They have made every aspect of military life into a form of creative expression, HFY noted in his personal log. Training, maintenance, logistics, communication, everything becomes an opportunity for innovation and artistic achievement. But what disturbed him most was how humans treated their former enemies. He observed a ceremony where human soldiers honored their opponents from previous conflicts. They erected monuments to enemy dead, invited former adversaries to speak at memorial services, and even provided medical care for veterans from both sides of old wars. They celebrate the courage of people who tried to kill them, HFY said to his aide. They turn their enemies into honored guests. The final decision came when HFY witnessed a human military unit conducting a rescue operation to save enemy soldiers who were trapped in a natural disaster. The humans risked their own lives to save people who had been actively fighting against them just months earlier. Confirmed, HFY announced to his crew, "I am going to Earth." "Sir," his second-in-command protested, "the Confederation will consider this desertion. You could face court-martial when you return." "If I return," HFY corrected. "I am not certain that will be possible after what I learned down there." The bureaucratic approval finally came through. HFY was granted temporary, civilian status and permission to travel to Earth for cultural research purposes. The Confederation probably assumed he would spend a few weeks observing human art and music before returning to his senses. They had no idea what he was really planning. HFY selected a small, fast courier ship for the journey to Earth. He could have taken one of the advanced diplomatic vessels, but he wanted to arrive quietly. His plan was to make contact with human authorities and request permission to study their military culture from the inside. As his ship approached Earth's solar system, HFY prepared the most important message of his career. He would be the first Confederation citizen to make official contact with humanity. What he said could determine the future relationship between the two civilizations. Earth control, he broadcast on standard diplomatic frequencies. "This is Commander HFY of the Galactic Confederation Navy. I am requesting permission to land for peaceful cultural exchange." The response came faster than he expected. "Unknown vessel. This is Earth Control. Please identify your species, your intentions, and your authorization for this contact." HFY smiled. Even in first contact, humans were asking practical questions and demanding proper documentation. "I am Marilon, an aquatic species from the Kepler system. I am requesting political asylum and permission to study human military culture. I have no authorization from my government for this contact." There was a long pause. "Did you just request political asylum?" the human controller asked. "Yes," HFY replied. "I am seeking protection from my own military and permission to learn from your people. Sir, you are going to need to speak with some very important people. Please proceed to coordinates we are transmitting and prepare for." "Well, we have no idea what to prepare for. This is a first for us." As HFY's ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had started as a routine military observer, confident in his understanding of warfare and intelligent behavior. Now he was a refugee seeking wisdom from the very beings he had been sent to evaluate. The landing site was a military base in what humans called Colorado. As his ship touched down, Zexai could see hundreds of human soldiers surrounding the landing pad. They were armed but not threatening. Their formation was defensive but not hostile. Even in first contact, they balanced caution with courtesy, he observed. The humans had prepared a pressurized chamber filled with water for his comfort. They had researched Maryland physiology and created an environment where he could survive comfortably. They had done all of this in the few hours since his initial contact. They adapt instantly to new situations, Zexai noted. Even peaceful ones. The first human he met was a general named Patricia Chen. She entered the water chamber wearing specialized breathing equipment and approached him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Commander Zexai, she said, welcome to Earth. I have to say, this is the most unusual request for asylum we have ever received. What exactly are you seeking to learn from us? Zexai chose his words carefully. General Chen, I have observed your military operations from a distance. What I have seen challenges everything my civilization believes about warfare, intelligence, and the nature of conflict itself. I need to understand how you have achieved what should be impossible, which is, you have turned warfare into art. You have weaponized compassion. You fight not just to win, but to create meaning. You treat your enemies as honored opponents rather than obstacles to eliminate. You have made conflict itself into a collaborative creative process. General Chen was quiet for several minutes. Commander, I think you may understand us better than we understand ourselves. What is it you want to do here? I want to learn, Zexai replied. I want to train with your soldiers, study your tactics, and understand your philosophy. My government will eventually make contact with humanity. When that happens, they need to understand what they are dealing with. And what are they dealing with? Zexai looked through the water at the human soldiers visible outside the chamber. They were maintaining security while simultaneously preparing welcoming ceremonies for their unexpected guest. They had turned a potential threat into an opportunity for cultural exchange. They are dealing with a species that has evolved beyond the need for conquest, he said. You fight not to destroy your enemies, but to transform them into allies. You have weaponized your own humanity and made it your greatest strength. General Chen nodded slowly. Commander, I think your education is going to be even more interesting than you expect. We have some things to teach you about the human way of war. And what is that? The ultimate victory is not defeating your enemy, she said. It is convincing your enemy to become your friend. As Zexai settled into his new quarters, he began the most important research project in galactic history. He would study humans not as an outside observer, but as a student seeking to understand the deepest mysteries of intelligent life. Somewhere above Earth, the Confederation fleet continued its routine patrols, unaware that one of their most experienced commanders had discovered something that would change everything they thought they knew about war, peace, and the infinite possibilities of thinking beings who refuse to accept the limitations of logic. The real education was about to begin,